The Rebel Capitalist Show.
One of my questions is when you guys left the Soviet Union, why come to the United States? There were a lot of other countries I'm assuming you could have gone to. And the reason I'm asking that is because some people are probably watching this right now and saying to themselves, okay, I understand what Simon is saying. And to me, the United States feels like what he was describing Russia in 1978. So I want to look for that plan B. I want to set up my own plan B. But today, where is the United States of 1978? Ironically, do you think it's in Eastern Europe because they have the experience that you had with socialism and central planning, and it's in their recent memory? They lived through it, and therefore they're less likely to go down that path in the next 10 or 20 years?
I don't know. This is very hard. I mean, there's this concept of nomad capitalism, as you know,
Yeah, sure.
where people are trying to untether themselves and they're going to float up there. That's not how we were thinking about it. We came to the United States for a number of reasons, but for one, we're being Jewish. There's a very large Jewish community here. Perversely, there's Russia, particularly Western Russia, where I grew up in St. Petersburg, is a cradle of one of the cradles of Western civilization in terms of museums. Well, to the credit of the Soviets, I have to say that they have maintained the cultural empire, Russian Empire, if you will. There were two philharmonic orchestras, there were two opera companies in St. Petersburg, there were world-class museums, and all of that was available to those people who wanted to partake of that. Excellent theater, excellent Broadway type shows, their version of that. And so it was fairly seamless. It was very difficult culturally at a commercial culture, like social culture level and language, but at a intellectual culture level, there's really no difference between Russia or London or New York, because the same opera companies and the same plays and the same authors and the same literature and the same everything. So if you're an intellectual person, that was a fairly easy thing to do. So my father, for example, who did freelance work and mostly worked at the Hermitage doing art books, ended up working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the photo studio doing art books. So it was a tremendous switch, but at the same time, it was lesser cultural switch that you may think. I don't see a place. I mean, people say that Asia is on the upswing, but I don't. But life is not just about the money, and life is about community and children and culture and common bonds and social life and things like that. I can't see, for example. So the reason I brought up nomad capitalism is people have this idea that they're just going to live in some country where they don't know the culture, they don't know the language. They're just going to sort of float on the cloud above it all, saving money on tax. They're going to have 3 properties. They're going to pay taxes nowhere. I think to me, it's a bit of ass backwards, because ultimately it's about the community. It's about, bringing up your children with some values, being a part of something, as opposed to just in some, gated community with a few other Americans or something like that.
But that same argument could have been used against you making the decision that you made back in 1978 from your fellow Russians, right?
So it was very easy, yes, and it was made, and that's why you said you were a traitor. But it was very easy in the Soviet Union to decide where to go. It was very hard to get out of the Soviet Union, but it was very easy to decide where to go.
I see.
The problem I think we have here is it's very easy to leave the United States. Where do you go?
Right.
Where do you go? Where is the United States of 1978? I don't see it. That culturally would be enough similar that you could put down roots. And, we came here to resettle, to acculturate, to build a life. We didn't come here to save on taxes or, to have a passport from whatever country so that we can do whatever we wanted. Somewhere in business class over the Atlantic. I mean, that wasn't the idea, and so I don't know where one would go today. Some people go to Puerto Rico, some people go to, Singapore. Some people go to Europe. I don't think Western Europe, when the crisis starts, can be any better than what's going on here. So maybe we're going to have to ride it out. I mean, maybe we have to band together with like-minded people and ride it out and hope that, these depression resolves itself in something better than what it might resolve itself.
How do you think? Okay, so let's assume for a moment that we're on the same path as, to a certain degree, that Russia was on in the late 1970s when you guys decided to leave. How do you think? Number one, do you think we can get off this road to serfdom, let's say? And then number two, what do you think would have changed in the 1970s in Russia, if anything, if we would have had the internet? And therefore people could communicate much more efficiently. And do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I do. But, it's very hard to say.
Yeah.
Because it's very hard to say because empires this just keeps happening time and again and again and again. I mean, we see that in when we're young and we're boisterous, we don't pay attention to risk. We want to take risks, and some maybe don't make it, but most make it. And it's this risk taking that propels us forward. And as we grow older, we become more cautious. We want to take less risks, and we want, the bailouts is not wanting to take the risk because nobody within the system knows, like, what if we let it go? Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah. So how do you think there's a way that we can get off this road to serfdom, for lack of a better term?
I sure hope so. But, I recently re-listened. There's an interview out there. Unfortunately, it's in Russian, so it's difficult for people to get the value from that. It was in 1964, the head of the Russian provisional government, who was in power from the moment the Tsar was deployed. It was the only democratic Russian government, like, for 6 months. From the moment the Tsar was overthrown in early 1917 and until Bolsheviks, the Bolshevik coup in the fall of that year was deposed. And so the head of that government ended up in the United States. His name was Alexander Kerensky. And in 1964, he was already in his 80s. Somebody interviewed him. And he gave like an hour and a half interview, which, I mean, it's incredible. This is a first-hand account of somebody who was at the pinnacle of the events, right. In the. And what I want to share from that is a couple of insights that I found very relevant to what we have now and instructive. And so we say, like, are we on the road to serfdom? What's going to happen? How's it going to happen? So it starts out, the interview strictly covers from the fall of 16 to the fall of 17. Like, what happened? Like, how did this thing go south the way it did?
Yeah.
So the first thing he said, the crisis started in the fall of 17. Nobody realized. I was 16. Nobody realized. The Tsar was deposed in February of 17. So 5 months before it happened, nobody realized. Not only did nobody realize it, the consensus was for exactly the opposite. The consensus was that the Tsar's administration was clamping down on civil liberties, in fact, was in the riding seat, and the dark road of repression was ahead. That civil liberties were constrained, and the Tsar was going to take over, clamp down even more. That the deep state, let's use today's language, was in complete control and clamping down. Okay? The tradition that fell apart, just for context, the Tsars were in power for 800 years leading up to that moment.
Right.
And the Romanov dynasty was in power for 300 years. And then he says the whole thing went down in 72 hours.
Wow. After 800
Between
years.
Friday, after 800 years and 300 years of this dynasty, from Friday to Sunday night,
wow,
it all went up in smoke. So thing number one, the consensus was for the opposite of what was actually happening. They thought the Tsar was in the strongest position ever, when in fact he was 3 months away from the whole thing coming apart. Okay? The second thing, when it went down, it went down, and I don't want to get into details of what happened, but it was a completely serendipitous event that was caused by a minor incident, and a couple of regiments went out in support of the parliament, and the whole thing just ended up a revolution. I mean, literally overnight. The other thing is Kerensky, who ended up running the government, which was overthrown by the communists, had personally said, I had no idea. I was on no list to be a part of any government. He was a lawyer and a liberal politician. So he was an accidental tourist, basically. He was a person from the left, if you will, who was not in any highly elevated position. He wasn't, quote unquote, a congressman by that standard, but just one of many. He wasn't any particular. So he was invited to join the government as a compromise to let the left into a more conservative government because of what happened over the weekend, and the Tsar fell, and they wanted support of more broader support. So he was brought in. This man ended up the head of the government in 3 months, and in 3 months he lost. What I see here is like, here's an accidental tourist who gets thrust, not prepared, not competent for this. I mean, competent person, not competent for that job.
Right.
Essentially to be the head of a government where then he's centrist, where the left wing from him is willing to kill and maim, and he doesn't have what it takes to hold him back. So A, nobody knew it was going to happen. B, people who ended up in control were accidentally thrust into that position. In that case, they weren't up to the job. And the whole thing went south, and 70 years of disaster ensued. So when you ask me what's going to happen, how could anybody know what's going to happen?
Do you think Biden's that guy? Do you see similarities with Biden?
Like I said, all we know is that the preconditions, we can see the underlying conditions.
Right.
We can see that the underlying, where I lost the train of thought before when I said we were forced off the gold standard in the 70s because we could not grow the way we wanted to grow, and we couldn't generate well, so what's in my mind is, does capitalist system actually work in this environment? And the reason I say that is because capitalism, the economic system, I'm not talking about free market system in general, I'm just saying the system that we've had that has produced phenomenal wealth and was completely incredible. It works when there's growth, when there's expansion. It is based on growth and expansion.
Right.
What happens when the whole world is a part of the system? What happens when instead of growing, the population starts flattening or contracting, which is happening? How does this demographic situation that we're in, what does that do to the ability to run the system the way we understand it to be successful in the past?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in other words, can we get back to basics, or the basics are no longer there to be gotten back to? Because we don't have another economic model for generating prosperity for everybody. We know central planning is not it.
Yeah. And they're just trying to create growth by printing money.
And so that's an attempt to defer the inevitable.
Yeah, which exacerbates the problem.
So the reason I'm concerned, and this is how I got into gold, is I'm concerned that everybody thinks we have an asset bubble, but we also have a consumption bubble. And when there's a consumption bubble, it's not just the valuations are overstated, which of course they are. The earnings are overstated. Everything is overstated. What is the North Star in this constellation? What doesn't move here? Is there something that doesn't move? Is there an anchor here that you can tie yourself to and ride the storm? What is it? Because all financial assets are valued based on earnings, based on cash flows, based on interest rates, and all of these things are in flux. And because of these massive subsidies and money printing, the earnings are higher than they would be. Because if government is spending $3 trillion it doesn't have, companies are selling $3 trillion worth of goods and services.
Right.
That otherwise couldn't be consumed.
There's no price discovery in anything. Not only is there no price discovery at the grocery store, but there's also no price discovery in the stock market.
In anything, right.